Hi and welcome. This week I'm talking with Steve Lamb about his passion for Moto Guzzis and in particular his most recent acquisition, a beautiful Mark I 850 Le Mans. Unfortunately, because of prior commitments, we were unable to film the Le Mans in action. However, I plan to do so sometime in the future. I hope you enjoy Steve's story. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
So how did you get into motorcycling originally?
My uncle and my cousins, he owned a plumbing business, and that still exists, and he had bought them trail bike, and we became interested. We built my brother and I built a go-kart of sorts, and then we said, oh, motorbikes, you know, our cousins have got those, oh, we'd like to get into that. And they were riding around on the old Honda SL70s in those days, which were, you know, really pretty new. But we couldn't afford to get them, so we were actually borrowing our cousin's bike, which caused a bit of a problem because they were well known for throwing chains, and at the time we had it, threw a chain and blew the gearbox, which didn't go down too well with our cousins. And then after that, it was just moving on to other like XR75s. My brother was built race. We used to race out of Broadford. He built a bike which ran on methanol. Went pretty quick, but pretty fragile.
Was that a XR?
XR75, yep. Very collectible these days, I noticed. They go for a lot of money. And then from there, it was just, you just moved. I did trail bike riding. We moved to Glen Waverley, and there wasn't the land available, but we still found places to ride. I moved on to a CT175 Yamaha, CT1575C, then DT400s, and from there it was just like the XT500 that I had for a while before it got stolen at RMIT when I was going to RMIT. And bought another one, modified that, and then it was just a range of road bikes after that. Z650s, GSX 1100s, quite a range. And then the Guzzis I'd bought in late 70s.
So what attracted you to the Moto Guzzis in particular?
I like the style of the S3, which was pretty much fairly new at that point in time. The Le Mans didn't really exist, or was talked about, but the S3 was available, and the 3 discs, and it was light, and also I'm a short rider.
Oh, seat height.
Seat height on a Guzzi is an advantage for a short rider. Although I don't have any trouble riding tall bikes. I ride a K100, rode K100 for 20 odd years, and that's a very tall bike and very heavy, very top heavy, but I've never had any trouble riding tall bikes.
Did you have any maintenance issues with the S3, or did you do any modifications to it?
The main maintenance issues with the S3 was, like all those Guzzis in the early days, was the gearbox spring.
Yes, I've done a few of those myself.
That went not long after I got it. So that was a learning job, replacing that. Apart from that, no, it was pretty reliable actually. The main thing was to improve reliability was replacing the stock ignition system with something that was points are good, but there comes a point where you go, I don't want to keep adjusting these things. So in those days, a Piranha ignition system was what most people stuck on. It was pretty much the only thing. Oh, there probably was some British, the Boyer systems and so on were around.
I think it was the Dyna system.
The Dyna system, which is actually what this has got on it. But this has still got the points. It's a Dyna booster, which is
Is that a separate product, is it?
Yeah.
Or I have never heard of that particularly.
It's called the Dyna Booster 2. It's actually just a transistor-assisted ignition, which uses the old system where you keep the points and it just boosts all they do is trigger an output, and away you go.
And the points should last a long time.
The points should last a long time, so the simplicity still remains. The Piranha system that was fitted to the S3 was actually an optical system, which is pretty reliable. I never had any trouble with it. That was probably the only 2 things, apart from the usual stuff with Guzzis, like leaking fork seals and leaking seals in the rear drive. I had a problem with that for a while there until I took it out and actually redressed the rear crown wheel holder. That had got a bit of rust on it, and where the seal ran, it just was cutting out the seal. So eventually I had to fix that, which wasn't a big deal. It just took a bit of work.
Is that the S3 you've still got?
Yes.
You don't part with your bikes easily then, do you?
No, I don't. I tend to keep things that I own. I've still got a lot of cars that I've had for many, many years, and yeah, it's just, you know, I'm running out of space.
I'm glad you can afford to keep everything.
Although there's some bikes I wish I'd kept, like the Le Mans Mark II, which I had for years. I wish I'd kept that, but that's, yeah, that's...
So,
that's
was that your next Moto Guzzi, the Mark II or something?
No, well, there's a bit of a story there. No, the next Guzzi I bought was actually a well, actually I didn't buy it, it was a T4. The T4 was an interesting story in that I had, I'd bought a BMW R100 CS, which was a mistake because that's one of the worst motorcycles I've ever owned in my life, although today they're worth a hell of a lot of money. Anyway, I came to the point where I decided I had enough and I wanted to get another Guzzi, and I still had the S3, but I needed something which is a bit more
day-to-day friendly.
And just out of interest, I advertised if anyone wanted to swap for a Guzzi for a R100 CS, and I got this guy who came around, and yep, he turned up with his T4, and to cut a long story short, we came to a deal, but he went out and blew up the R100 CS, blamed me. It was not a very nice experience, even though, as it turned out, I discovered that the guy who owned it, who bought the R100 from me, had actually gone out and blown it up through his own stupidity, and so that was was not a nice experience.
Maybe we should move on from there to the next Moto Guzzi.
Yes, you might want to edit that out. But
that was the Mark II Le Mans, was it? The next one along?
Yeah, that was the Mark II Le Mans, which I bought from a guy who was a policeman actually. He advertised it. Really nice bike to you know, a bit smoother. I think they made a few improvements to the not a huge number, but I think it was a really nice bike to ride, except for the fact that it had a close ratio gearbox, racing gearbox fitted, which had a very, very tall first gear, of course, as they all do, and it was very noisy to ride, whiny, and so on.
Straight cut then.
Straight cut gearbox. And so not very user friendly around town. And of course, I had in those days I hadn't had much experience with them. So you know, you wanted another Guzzi. It was a really nice looking bike. It was very original apart from the. Well, I think the gearbox may have been bought as a factory extra. I don't know whether it was swapped in later or not. He didn't know either. But it also had very heavy throttles, and I had just had an accident on an XS 1100. Nothing major, but it had damaged the ligaments in the thumb, and I found it very, very hard to ride after, even for half an hour. The throttles were that heavy; it was becoming a real problem for me. So I decided it was time to move on from that and sold it, and ended up buying another GSX 1100. So, which is, you know.
So you strayed from the fold for a few years then.
Oh, I'd had GSX 1100 for a while. I actually rode a Le Mans at Peter Stevens when they first, Le Mans the Mark III. I rode one of the first ones in the country out at Peter Stevens in Dandenong. And it was just too much to spend. I didn't want to spend that much at that point in time. And the GSX 1100 was there, which is what I was actually looking at. And so I ended up buying that. And that they actually are, I've noticed, worth a lot of money too. And so I sort of wish the very first models of those, the E model, is actually worth quite a lot of money now.
Probably not as much as a
Mark II Le Mans, but
or even a Mark II.
Yeah, there you go. But that's just the way it goes. I mean, you know, you make your decisions in life, and you live with it.
You do.
But yeah, I mean, I bought the Mark II. I kept the T4 for a while. Decided that touring wasn't really my thing, and so moved away. Kept the S3, but moved away from Guzzis apart from that into other things.